podcast. Glad that you're taking the opportunity and giving us the privilege to um, speak to you about making authentic, genuine biblical disciples. I remind you just of a couple of things. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Both of those, you'll find a link to the podcast on YouTube. Go directly to YouTube and type in the first couple of words, and it should come up pretty quickly. We would appreciate it if, in doing that, you like, follow, share, subscribe. Also a place for you to make comments about the podcast, to ask questions that we may have left unanswered, or some issues perhaps that we have not covered that you would be interested in having us to research. We'd be glad to do that. And your prayer request. We cherish the opportunity to pray for you and what is happening in your lives, and even if we don't get requests, just know that we pray for all of those who watch the podcast. And Rob could tell you more about this than I could, but I think, Rob, we have had people who have viewed the podcast even outside of the continental United States.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting to us, because methodology of Jesus, the method by which he intended for his disciples in the first century and in 2025 was a world vision to reach the world with the good news. So we're going to talk. We're if you can believe this, I said something to Rob the other day about, we're out of the several different parentheses in that parenthetical sort of exposition concerning discipleship in relation to sanctification, and now we're going to get back at looking at some of the specifics about making and becoming authentic, genuine biblical disciples. I have a couple little books that I want to share with you. Maybe you have heard of Robert E. Coleman. I believe the E is for Irwin. Robert Irwin Coleman. And I don't know if you can get. This is Dr. Coleman. He is, if I have calculated it right, fact check my math, he was born in 1928, Rob, so that would make him how old?
1928.
Born in 1928. Actually, old?
97.
97. He's 97 years old. He is still actively teaching in a seminary in the northern part of the United States. One of the most recent things I believe that he has done, and this is a book that is widely used in churches across the denominational board. It's entitled Discipleship, 5 Steps that help your church to make disciples who, in underline red, make disciples. The two primary authors are Jim Putman and Bobby Harrington. They are both pastors and created the website I think I mentioned in the last episode, discipleship.org. But Robert Coleman collaborated with them in this book, Discipleship. Robert Coleman is, I suppose, the guru of discipleship and evangelism. We'll talk more way back in beginning of our podcast and first 2 or 3 episodes. We said a little bit about the association, if you will, between evangelism and discipleship. They are like 2 peas in a pod, one without the other. It's hard to imagine that the methodology of Jesus and his world vision, reaching the world with the gospel, could be accomplished through either one of those. And so they go together. And Robert Coleman, I know these look like really, really small books, and they are. His first one was the Master Plan of Evangelism. He did this prior to the Master Plan of Discipleship. These are 2 books that, if you really want to go deeper into understanding discipleship, relationship with evangelism, how they go together, and how the vision of Jesus to reach the world, the method that Jesus used in doing so, can be discovered in these 2 books. I suppose many of the volumes that have been compiled since Dr. Coleman did the Master Plan of Evangelism have been based somewhat upon both of these works that he has done. So just if you can get these, I usually buy all my books at used prices and pay more for the shipping, Rob, than I do the book sometimes. And these are 2 good little books to pick up. This one, we will be using quite a bit of Dr. Coleman's material in talking about the methodology of Jesus and making authentic, biblical, genuine biblical disciples. But yeah, you know, short preliminary prerequisite to that is, you know, let's try to answer the question, why make disciples? Why is it so important that probably within the last 10 to 12 years you will find more material, whether it is through scholarly journals or volumes such as these on making disciples and discipleship than, well, I don't know, probably the 25, 30 years prior to that. And in fact, remember, we have mentioned Dallas Willard, who wrote The Great Omission in 2006, and prophetically, he foresaw the deficiency in the church. And again, we're talking about, you know, whatever denomination. He saw the deficiency of making disciples, of discipling believers, and begin to come up with this conception, for lack of a better word, of the two D's, decision versus disciple. And for so long, the church had, and I think, you know, maybe still, because we are in the midst of this deficiency, the church has focused on the decision, but not the disciple. And that is not to say that any of these, or I would say to you that a decision is not important. It is. You have to make the decision. What was that episode? 99.9% has to do with the decision that you and I make as to whether or not we are going to be authentic, genuine, biblical disciples, followers of Jesus. And so it is important. It was important to Jesus, so much so that it was the first act of his earthly ministry. It was the last act of his earthly ministry before he ascended into heaven. In fact, in Matthew, the 28th chapter, in verse 19, it is what we have come to call the Great Commission. I tend to refer to it as the great commands that Jesus commissioned his disciples to follow in acts of obedience. And there in the 19th verse, in the 28th chapter of Matthew, Jesus said, "Go, therefore, and make disciples. Now, let me stop there for a moment. As we continue to read the verse, I want you to notice explicitly the order that Jesus issues the commands, the imperatives. The first is the first word. And the verse 19, is the word go. And Jesus intended for his disciples, for us, to go to where people needed to hear the good news and become believers, make a decision. It's important. But then become disciples. Come and see is something that we, I think, place too much emphasis on sometimes. Come to this event, come to this activity, come to our worship service, come to our Sunday school classes, our Bible, come to, and there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's good to extend those kinds of invitations. But it is not the command first given by Jesus. He did not say to his disciples, go out and just tell people to come. Well, in order to get to those folks that they might come to, you have to do the first thing that Jesus commanded. You have to go. So the first imperative, the first command that Jesus gives in the Great Commission to his disciples, to us, is go. And then he says after that, go and baptize them. Right? No, wrong. We typically do it that way. There are many churches now who are following more closely the commands of the Great Commission and the priority in which Jesus issued those commands. So it wasn't, go and baptize them and then make out of them disciples. No, it was go. Jesus said, first imperative. Second, make disciples of all nations. That's the world vision. Then baptize them. Rob, I think, we go, say, come see, run them through the holy water, baptize. And the discipling process gets lost.
Sounds like a car wash to me.
Sure, sort of does, doesn't it?
What's going to happen to that car in a few days?
Good analogy. I'm glad I thought of that.
You're welcome.
But yeah, that is exactly, you know, what it does sound like. Go make disciples, and then baptize them. The baptism is an identification with who Jesus is and what Jesus did, his death, his burial, his resurrection. Do you have to be baptized to go to heaven? Well, maybe we should ask, if we've heard this before, maybe we should ask the thief on the cross. I don't recall that Jesus came down and they took the time to run to the Jordan River and baptize the thief on the cross. No, it's not necessary to salvation. It is necessary to identification. I identify now with Jesus. I have died to my sins, my old self. I am raised to new life in Christ. But is it necessary to be a disciple in order to experience salvation? Indeed. For Jesus said this is the decision to Nicodemus in John the 3rd chapter. We don't hear these words preached anymore, but Jesus told Nicodemus, you must be born again. Literally, born anew. Paul said, picking up, I suppose, on what Jesus has said, that we become new, and there are different translations to that word, creations, creatures. Essentially, we become new human beings in Jesus Christ. That is the decision that is made to become a disciple. Now, we've got to say just a word about discipleship or disciple and Christian. The Greek word for disciple is thetas, and it basically means one who is a student or one who is a learner, a pupil. Jesus, we said this, he did not invent disciple. There were disciples in the Old Testament. There were disciples outside of, the biblical context. But Jesus gave it a new meaning. To be a pupil implies what? implies that logically there is a teacher. If you are a pupil, then there is a teacher. And Jesus was often called teacher, good teacher, rabbi, which means teacher. So Jesus became the teacher of those whom he called to be disciples. Nothing new about that. What was new about it was that Jesus took the teaching of the disciples outside of the realm of a building or a retreat at Caesarea Philippi and said, follow. Now that was new. That was radical. It was basically what had happened prior to that was that, they went to the synagogue and you were taught the Torah, and Jesus went a step beyond to what I call fellowship. We need the teaching. We need to learn. We need the classroom setting. We need the retreat at Caesarea Philippi to learn what it means to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. But we also need the fellowship. Follow him. Literally, those first disciples followed him everywhere he went. And you know what? They had their eyes fixed upon their master, the teacher. They had their ears tuned in to their master, their teacher. They watched, they listened, they did what Jesus did. In all of that, you think that I have gotten away from the subject. Why make disciples? No, because all of that is prerequisite to the why we make disciples. Disciples cannot go and replicate themselves if they're not disciples themselves. My father was Rob, a jack of all trades. He was a preacher, pastor by profession, and preached until he was 88 years old. He died just before his 90th birthday. Started preaching when he was 33. I don't know how many years that is. It was a long, long time. But I saw him take a little black bug Volkswagen, 60s model, take it, complete the engine completely apart. It didn't run. Put it back together. And I don't know, probably 4, 5, or 6 years, he and my mother would pack in that little Volkswagen 4-speed 4 children, no air conditioning, and head from Fort Union, Virginia to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I saw him completely rewire a house that was built prior to the end of the Civil War in 1865, was built in 1863. It had no plumbing in it, and we did it all. He was a jack of all trades. He could do anything. I'm not nearly as handy with my hands as he was. Certainly not the preacher pastor he was. But what little bit I do know about plumbing, about electrical work, I've given up on vehicles because they're just totally, different than what they were in the 70s when I had a 67 GTX with a 440. But a lot, if not most, of what I learned was by watching and listening. My teacher, going where he went, doing what he did, suggests to you that if we do not keep our eyes and our ears fixed on the master teacher, we will not ever become or be in the process of becoming authentic, genuine, biblical disciples whom he, the Master, intended to take the good news, to go replicate themselves to every nation of the world. There's an old song, and I'm finished beyond my time. I'm sorry, Rob. An old song, I can't remember the name of it, but I know used to sing it way back when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and somewhere in that song, hymn, were words like God, and these may not be exact, maybe some of you remember the hymn, is filling of heaven with sinners, saved by his grace through his Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you. We'll see you next time when we will continue to talk about why make disciples, looking a little more closely at the methodology, the reasons behind why Jesus wants disciples to continue to make disciples. God bless you. We'll see you next time.